Let me take you back to a moment in my life where everything looked fine from the outside. I had a decent job, friends, a stable routine. I smiled at the right times, laughed when expected, and posted pictures that told the world I was doing great. But inside, there was a war raging, a constant tug-of-war between who I thought I had to be and who I really was. I didn't have the words for it then, I just knew something wasn't right. I felt like I was living someone else's life. Every decision, every conversation, every plan. It all felt like I was wearing a mask. A really convincing one, but a mask nonetheless. One night, I remember standing in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing my teeth, and suddenly stopping. I looked myself in the eyes and whispered, "What are you doing?" Not in a judgmental way, not even with anger, just pure confusion. I felt like a stranger to myself. That was the beginning of everything changing. That question was the crack in the mask. And what followed wasn't some dramatic epiphany. It was messy, confusing, painful, and yet liberating. See, we're taught that inner conflict means something's wrong with us, that it's a sign of weakness, instability, or failure. But here's what I've learned. Inner conflict is the birthplace of clarity. When your mind feels like a battlefield, it's usually because your soul is waking up. It's trying to tell you something. Maybe it's whispering that the path you're on doesn't align with your values anymore. Maybe it's screaming that you've been people-pleasing for too long. Or maybe, just maybe, it's asking you to stop running and start listening. Let me give you a metaphor. Imagine your inner world like a house. For years, you've been stuffing all the uncomfortable emotions into a back closet. Fear, self-doubt, anger, insecurity. Whenever something unpleasant came up, you shoved it in there and slammed the door. You told yourself, "I don't have time for this," or "I need to stay strong," or "It's not a big deal." But one day, the door doesn't close anymore. It bursts open, and all the things you avoided come flooding out. That's the chaos. That's the inner conflict. But it's not a breakdown, it's a breakthrough. Because only when the house is messy can you see what you've been holding on to. Only then can you clean, sort, and choose what stays and what goes. When I started leaning into the discomfort instead of avoiding it, things began to shift. I started journaling. Not in a poetic, Instagrammable way, just raw brain dumps. I wrote things I was afraid to say out loud. I gave my fear a voice. I let my confusion speak. And you know what I found? There was wisdom in the chaos. Every contradiction, every painful memory, every inner conflict. It all had something to teach me. It wasn't about fixing myself. It was about understanding myself. There was one journal entry that changed the game for me. I had written, "I don't know who I am anymore." And right below it, almost like a whisper from a deeper part of me, I wrote, "Good. Now you get to find out." That was the moment I realized the chaos wasn't destroying me. It was stripping away who I wasn't. And here's the thing. Clarity isn't this magical beam of light that shines down from the heavens. It's quiet. It comes in waves. It often looks like stillness, like peace after a storm. It arrives when you've finally stopped running from yourself. When you sit with your questions long enough, they begin to turn into answers. But not always the answers you expected. Often better ones. The kind that come not from who you were told to be, but from who you truly are. Another metaphor that helped me understand this better is the idea of the internal boardroom. Imagine that inside you, there's a table surrounded by different parts of you. There's the achiever, always pushing for more. The inner critic, always pointing out your flaws. The child, just wanting to be loved. The rebel, tired of following the rules. The dreamer, full of ideas. And maybe even the skeptic, doubting everything. Most of us try to silence the voices we don't like. We let the achiever take over and tell the rebel to shut up. Or we let the critic drive while the child cries in the corner. But what if you invited them all to the table? What if, instead of choosing sides, you became the one who listens? That's what embracing inner conflict really means. Becoming the observer. The space where all these parts can exist without judgment. And when you do that, something magical happens. Those voices start working together. The critic becomes a guide for improvement instead of shame. The rebel shows you where freedom lives. The child reminds you why joy matters. And the achiever? Well, they stop running on burnout and start moving with purpose. Let me tell you a personal story. There was a time I was about to quit everything, my job, my relationships, even this whole journey of self-awareness. The thing about clarity is, it doesn't arrive like a spotlight. It shows up more like a sunrise, slowly, subtly. You hardly notice it at first, until one day you look back and realize, wow, I can see things now that I couldn't before. After that rainy night on the park bench, something in me softened. Not everything made sense yet, but I had stopped trying to figure it all out in one go. Instead, I started paying attention to the little shifts, the micro moments, like how I suddenly didn't feel drained in silence anymore, or how I started saying no without explaining myself. Those small changes didn't come from forcing clarity. They came from trusting the process of embracing the mess. And here's a metaphor I live by now. Healing and clarity isn't like building a skyscraper with blueprints. It's like digging up a garden. First, you find the weeds, the old stories, the roots of shame and comparison. Then you get your hands dirty. You sit in the soil of your own discomfort, pulling up what no longer serves. It's slow. You cry. You question everything. But then, you make space for something real, for something true. One of the biggest lies we're told is that we have to get it together before we can be happy, loved, or successful. But what if I told you the people who feel the most whole are the ones who've embraced the fact that they're made of many pieces, that every part of you, even the confused, angry, scared parts, belongs? There was a season in my life where I was stuck between two versions of myself. The one I had always been, high-achieving, overthinking, saying yes when I meant no, and the one I was becoming, honest, grounded, aligned. And let me tell you, that in-between space, that's where the real war happens. You're not who you were anymore, but you're not quite sure who you're becoming. That limbo feels like chaos, but it's actually transformation. One day, I was sitting across from a close friend. I was venting about how I felt lost, like I didn't belong anywhere. She looked at me, nodded, and then said something I'll never forget. "You're molting." At first I laughed. I mean, who compares a person to a snake shedding skin? But then, she explained, "You're not broken. You're just shedding what no longer fits. And yes, it's uncomfortable. It's itchy. It feels raw. But that's growth. That's clarity. The kind that only comes after the chaos." And I thought, wow, that's it. We don't give ourselves enough credit for the in-between phases. We celebrate before and after stories, but we don't talk enough about the middle, the mess. The days when you wake up not knowing what you believe anymore. When you question every choice. When you feel like your heart and your brain are speaking two different languages. But that's the work. That's where the wisdom is born. There's something sacred about reaching your breaking point. Not because pain is noble, but because when your old identity shatters, you get to pick up the pieces you actually want to keep. You realize some of those pieces were never yours to begin with. They were expectations, roles, labels handed down by society, family, culture. And when you let go of what isn't yours, what's left is what's real. I want to tell you about a conversation I had with my younger self. Not literally, of course, but through a guided meditation I did one evening. I imagined myself as a little kid, wide-eyed, sensitive, full of questions. I asked them, "What do you need from me?" And you know what that younger version of me said? "Stop pretending. Just be with me." That broke me, because I realized I had spent so many years trying to be someone I thought the world would approve of, while neglecting the most tender, honest parts of myself. That night, I wrote a letter to the version of me that always tried to keep it together. I thanked them. I told them they did what they had to do to survive. But I also told them, you don't have to carry it all anymore. It's okay to let go. That letter wasn't some magical cure, but it was a turning point, because that's when I understood. Embracing inner conflict isn't about choosing one part over the other. It's about integrating all of you. Here's the shift that really changed me. I stopped asking, how do I fix this? And started asking, what is this trying to teach me? That shift alone transformed how I handled conflict, both internal and external. I stopped labeling my confusion as failure. I stopped treating my anxiety like a problem to be solved. Instead, I got curious. I listened. And the more I did that, the more I started to trust myself. Not because I had all the answers, but because I was finally willing to sit with the questions. Another powerful moment came during a silent retreat. 3 days of no talking, no distractions, just me, my thoughts, and the forest. Sounds peaceful, right? It wasn't. The silence was deafening at first. All the suppressed thoughts rose up like ghosts. Regrets, fears, old wounds. But by the second day, something softened. I started to hear not just the noise in my head, but the voice beneath the noise. That voice didn't shout. It whispered. It reminded me who I was beneath the roles and masks. And I realized clarity doesn't come from avoiding chaos. It comes from walking through it, slowly, consciously, with courage. In the world we live in, fast-paced, filtered, obsessed with certainty, embracing inner conflict feels radical. But maybe that's exactly what we need. Maybe clarity isn't found by silencing the noise, but by learning to distinguish the voice within it. Maybe growth doesn't look like perfection, but like becoming more whole. Before we close this second part, I want to leave you with this image. Imagine your inner world like an orchestra. All these parts of you, fear, ambition, grief, joy, doubt, each one playing their own instrument. At first, it's just noise. Everyone's out of sync. But then, slowly, as you begin to listen, to tune in, something starts to shift. The notes begin to harmonize. Not because the noise disappears, but because you've stepped into the role of the conductor, the one who doesn't silence the instruments, but guides them into unity. That's what embracing inner conflict gives you. Not a perfect life, not an easy life, but a true one. A life where you're no longer hiding from yourself. A life where clarity rises, not from certainty, but from honesty. By now, maybe you're starting to realize something that took me years to fully understand. Clarity isn't something you arrive at and stay in forever. It's more like the sky, sometimes clouded, sometimes stormy, and sometimes clear, but always there, always accessible, if you know how to return to it. And returning for me began with learning how to befriend the very things I used to fear inside myself. Let me tell you about the time I hit what I can only describe as an emotional rock bottom. It wasn't a single dramatic event. It was more like a slow erosion. Day by day, I kept ignoring the signs, the way I felt exhausted even after sleeping, the growing numbness in conversations, the constant ache of pretending. One afternoon, I was alone in my apartment, scrolling through social media, feeling this strange emptiness, like everyone else had life figured out, and I was just drifting. And then I saw a quote. Simple. Almost too simple. It said, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." A line from Rumi. I'd seen it before. But this time, it hit different, because I realized I was full of wounds, and maybe, just maybe, that wasn't a flaw. Maybe those wounds were portals, places where truth could enter if I stopped trying to patch them up too quickly. So I did something radical. I let myself feel, fully, without trying to fix it. I sat on the floor, let the tears come, and whispered to the hurt parts of me, "You're allowed to be here." And in that moment, the pain didn't vanish, but it stopped being the enemy. It became a companion, a messenger. From that day forward, I started practicing something I now call emotional presence. Not analysis, not control, just presence. When anxiety came, I sat with it and asked, "What are you trying to protect me from?" When anger came, I asked, "What boundary did I let someone cross?" When sadness rose up, I asked, "What am I mourning that I haven't named yet?" These questions didn't solve the emotions. They honored them, and that changed everything. Think of it like this. If your inner conflict was a room you always kept locked, presence is the act of opening the door, turning on the light, and saying, "I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to listen." That's the beginning of wholeness. That's the start of real clarity. When you stop splitting yourself into good and bad, and start becoming a home for all of it. And that brings me to a truth I used to resist, but now find sacred. We don't heal by eliminating parts of ourselves. We heal by integrating them. Wholeness doesn't mean peace all the time. It means holding both, the joy and the grief, the certainty and the doubt, the strength and the vulnerability, in one body, without shame. There's a story I once heard about kintsugi, the Japanese art of mending broken pottery with gold. Instead of hiding the cracks, they fill them with precious metal. The philosophy behind it is powerful. The breakage becomes part of the object's history. Not a flaw, but a feature, a testament to its resilience. And I realized that's what happens when you embrace inner conflict. You become like kintsugi, not perfect, but whole, marked by experience, beautiful not despite your wounds, but because of them. And let's be honest, clarity isn't just about deep emotions and personal transformation. It also changes how you show up in the world. Once I started honoring my inner world, my outer world began to shift. I stopped choosing relationships out of fear. I started having hard conversations without needing everyone to agree with me. I began to speak with more softness, not because I was unsure, but because I was grounded. People noticed. "You seem different," they'd say. "Calmer." Like, "You trust yourself more." And the truth is, I did. Not because I had all the answers, but because I had learned how to live with the questions, to stop reacting from fear and start responding from alignment. Here's another metaphor that landed deeply with me. Imagine your inner conflict like a stormy ocean. For most of your life, you've been tossed around by the waves, struggling to stay afloat, reaching for anything that might keep you safe. But one day, you decide to stop fighting the waves. You dive beneath the surface, and below all that noise, you find something unexpected: stillness. That's your center. That's your clarity. It was never about calming the storm. It was about going deeper than it. And the deeper you go, the more you realize everything you were searching for: peace, purpose, direction. It was never out there. It was always inside, waiting, whispering, sometimes through your tears, sometimes through your gut, sometimes in the silence between thoughts, but always there. Now, I won't pretend this journey is linear. You'll still have days where everything feels like a mess. Moments where you question yourself again. That's okay. That's human. But the difference is, now you know how to meet yourself in those moments. You've built inner muscles. You've learned to stay, to listen, to love yourself not only when things make sense, but when they don't. If you take nothing else from this story, take this. Conflict isn't the opposite of clarity. It's the catalyst. It's the invitation to come home to yourself, to stop performing, to start becoming. And the beauty is, when you live from that place of inner truth, the world around you begins to respond. Opportunities align. Relationships deepen. You stop chasing things that drain you and start building a life that reflects who you really are. A life that feels like you. Not perfect, not always easy, but honest, meaningful, alive. So if you're in the thick of it right now, if your mind feels messy and your heart feels heavy, take a breath. You're not lost. You're just molting. You're not broken. You're breaking open. And what's waiting on the other side isn't a fixed version of you. It's a freer one. Clarity, in the end, isn't a destination. It's a way of being, a way of choosing truth again and again, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. So here's to the chaos, the doubt, the breakdowns, the breakthroughs. Here's to the sacred mess that brings us home to ourselves. Because in that space, in that raw, real, unfiltered place, that's where the light gets in. And that's where clarity begins.